Over the years, Dead by Daylight has accumulated many iconic horror licenses, but that doesn't mean there aren't any left to add. As I mentioned in my Is Dead by Daylight Losing Its Identity video, I believe there are still many licenses that I think are well deserving of a spot in the game. These are my top 5 most wanted licenses for Dead by Daylight. Before I get into my top 5 though, I want to quickly go over a few honorable mentions. These honorable mentions include licenses that I would like to see in the game, but for one reason or another I don't think will make it into the game anytime soon, unfortunately. My first set of honorable mentions would be some Valve owned properties, specifically Half-Life and Portal. The Half-Life and Portal franchises contain some of my favourite games and both offer rich stories with an abundance of cool and interesting characters that I would love to see in Dead by Daylight. Half-Life would make a class survivor paragraph or cosmetic collab. Being able to play as Gordon Freeman, Alex Vance, Barney Calhoun or even Dr. Kleiner would be a lot of fun. A Black Mesa map would equally be as cool. If they really wanted to get crazy with it, they could try bring the G-Man in as a killer, but unlike other killers who are trapped by the entity, the G-Man is simply passing through, looking to recruit survivors for his cause. His Mori could result in the survivor seeing the iconic recruited screen rather than killing him. I think Portal would also make an amazing full chapter with Shell as the survivor, GLaDOS as the killer, and an Aperture as the map. Perhaps it could include portals similar to the Forgotten Runes map, but you don't need to interact with them, you just walk through them, like in the games, and end up in a new spot. GLaDOS would need a bit of work to convert her to an anthropomorphic design, so she'd fit into the killer role, but I think this could result in a fun new take on the character with a cool new design. Unfortunately, despite Behavior's good relationship with Valve, these collabs are unlikely as when Valve IP is added, Behavior have to make it obtainable for free, as seen with Bill from Left 4 Dead. While it would be very cool for either Half-Life or Portal to join, I don't see Behavior using their resources to make a free chapter. Perhaps one day we might get Gordon or Shell in the game as a free earnable skin, but I wouldn't count on it. The final honorable mentions are Stephen King licenses, specifically It and The Shining. Pennywise is one of the most iconic horror villains and would fit perfectly among the cast of killers in Dead by Daylight. They could easily make a Derry map and they have a plethora of survivors to choose from. The same can be said for The Shining. Jack Torrance and the Overlook Hotel are two iconic pieces of horror. The Shining is a personal favourite of mine as well. Wendy or a grown-up Danny could also make for a great survivor. Unfortunately, Stephen King has gone on record saying he doesn't like giving his licenses out for video games, for whatever reason, and the devs have even mentioned how they've relentlessly tried to get Pennywise in the game. So like Valve IP, it's unlikely we'll see Pennywise or Jack in the fog anytime soon. Now that we've gone over the honourable mentions, we can start with my top 5. And my number 5 spot is Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th. The reason for this license being number 5 and not number 1 is quite simply because it's so expected. When you clicked on this video, you probably assumed I was going to mention Jason. Well, congratulations, you were right. It's for good reason that Jason is such a popular pick. He's one of the most iconic horror figures, and it's not a matter of if Jason will join the game, but a matter of when. With the devs quite literally inviting him into the fog, the only thing in the way of Jason being added is some legal issues. But recently, we've seen the Jason IP have a resurgence, as he's being added to games like Multiverses, rest in peace, and even so much as being rumoured to be joining Fortnite. If I was a betting man, I'd wager that we'll see our hockey mask wearing friend joining the fog on the 10th anniversary. Legal semantics and speculation aside, gameplay wise I think Jason would fit right in. The chapter could have Jason as the killer, Camp Crystal Lake as the map, and Tommy Jarvis as the survivor. I think few people would argue against having Jason in the game. He's been a long time coming and I'd love to see him in the game anytime soon. At my number 4 spot we have Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks is a show about FBI agent Dale Cooper investigating the death of Laura Palmer in the town of Twin Peaks. Despite the simple setup, the show is anything but simple, with its supernatural, uncanny and horror tones. Twin Peaks is an insanely influential show going as far as to influence games like Silent Hill and Alan Wake, both of which can be found in Dead by Daylight. Twin Peaks has to be my second favourite TV show of all time, and I would love to see it in the game. I think it'd best work as a solo survivor paragraph with the Red Room map. Dale Cooper would be the survivor, and you could have legendaries to be various other iconic characters from the show. I don't think Bob would work as the killer though. He honestly feels more like a presence in the show, a looming threat rather than an active one. It would also feel a bit odd to have this character and what he represents as a playable character in my opinion. If a survivor paragraph is too much, a cosmetic collection would also be very cool, adding legendaries for some of the main cast with outfits to dress up as some of the secondary characters. Now on to number 3, Slenderman. Slenderman was one of my first introductions to horror as a whole, specifically the game Slenderman The 8 Pages, released in 2012. This game, with its simple premise and by today's standards, rudimentary graphics, was able to instill both feelings of horror and intrigue into my 9-year-old self. In my opinion, despite looking a bit outdated, the game still holds up and is executed well enough that if you were to play it today, some of the eerie charm would still be there. Without Slenderman, I'm not sure I'd be into horror as much as I am now. I'm sure there are plenty of other people who grew up with Slenderman, watching his videos and reading his stories that also feel the same way. I also think it'd be cool for Behaviour to add their first creepypasta type killer. A creepypasta just being a horror related legend that's been spread across the internet. We've had chapters based on games, movies, shows, books and even manga, so having one based on internet folklore could be cool. I think he'd work best as a solo killer chapter. I don't think he'd need a map, as his power will more likely add pages to each map, making them a bit unique themselves. While I know Slenderman isn't as iconic as most of horror's mascots, I still think he has a place in the game for getting a whole new generation into horror. Now my number 2 pick might be a bit niche, but I believe Elvira, Mistress of the Dark would be a perfect fit for Dead by Daylight. Ever since they started adding chapters containing only survivors to the game, I knew Elvira would be a perfect fit, as she's a cult horror icon. Elvira is a character created by Cassandra Peterson that she used as a horror TV hostess, meaning she would act as the host or presenter of a show where horror films and low-budget B-movies are shown. Her show was called Elvira's Movie Macabre. Through this show, she became something of a pop culture icon, having her brand plastered on everything Halloween. She's made hundreds of film, television, and live appearances, and has even co-wrote and starred in her 2 own movies, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and Elvira's Haunted Hills. Weirdly enough, one of the first places I heard of her was actually in a DLC map for Infinite Warfare Zombies. Peak map, by the way, argue with the wall. I think she's notable in the fact that while most horror icons are killers or monsters, she's one that will only really work as a survivor. Behaviour are always trying to add new mediums to the game, so a horror hostess is something new. I find the character Elvira a lot of fun, and I think she has a lot of potential for some fun perks and voice lines that could rival the inclusion of Nicolas Cage. I also think that Behaviour wouldn't have too much trouble trying to get her into the game, as she was able to be added to Call of Duty and even the Killer Clowns from Outer Space game. Finally, for my number 1 spot, we have The Thing. The Thing is one of my favourite horror movies of all time. I think a thought that almost everyone has when just starting to play Dead by Daylight is, what if they add a killer that can turn into survivors? And part of me believes that the reason they've never added one is because they're holding out for this license. Having a killer that could mimic and fool survivors would be really cool. As well as a cool concept for a killer, The Thing is just an all-round great movie, showing the paranoia and distrust among the research team as they're unsure who's human. If Behaviour were able to make a killer that can replicate this feeling, I think they'd have a great chapter on their hands. The Thing already has Dead by Daylight's The Something naming convention, so don't even have to think of a new name. I think it should be added as a full chapter, with The Thing as the killer, the research facility as the map, and RJ McCready as the survivor. The Thing should be able to transform into any survivor that is attacked to be used as a stealth killer, while also being able to transform in some of its more monstrous appearances in order to chase survivors. Nowadays, killers can't really rely solely on stealth, so it needs some sort of chase power, I think. At the start of the game, The Thing would take the appearance of one random survivor, allowing them to get an early game jump scare without the need of attacking any survivors. The Thing is a horror movie with great practical effects, smart characters, and a relentless monster, and I think it would fit into Dead by Daylight perfectly. That concludes my list of my most wanted licenses in DBD. Hopefully one day we'll see some or all these licenses in the game. What do you think of my list? Do you agree with any of my takes? What licenses would you want in the game? Let me know down in the comments. Finally, I'd appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. I'm trying to reach 10k subs and I'm almost there. That's all for now. Thank you and goodbye.